Hi, I'm David Jacobson, and I would love to welcome you here for this first of a series of three about adapting and pioneering in this new virtual world. I'd like to answer just a few questions that, bring some logistical information to bear so you know that this presentation, a link to the recording, and a number of resources will be presented to everybody who is in attendance. And you're welcome to share them with anybody else that you feel could benefit from it. When we started thinking about what we were experiencing as ourselves and as a community, we realized that almost with a flip of a switch, the lights were turned out in our office. We were asked to leave. Maybe we got a VPN. We were told to work from home, and that was it. That was it. That's what we got. And so we realized that this was such a shocking transition for so many reasons. And we began to contemplate what we could do for the greater Dallas community, for our own Cox School of Business community. And we realized something. We realized that what sets SMU Cox School of Business community apart from other schools are our people and our purpose and our loyalty to each other. Our purpose and our people have been tested over the last few weeks. We're living through what for many of us will be the most tumultuous and unsettling period of our lives. The combination of understandable concern for health and safety for those of our loved ones, combined with the massive disruptions to our communities, our workplace, our society, education, business, and even our ability to move freely around is deeply unsettling. And while we at Cox cannot turn back the clock, we can serve our community by helping our working professionals, our students, other members of the community address the concerns and make the most of this sense of grief and disruption by providing tools to accommodate the new virtual world and the dynamic disrupting forces that are swirling all around us as we suddenly had to work from home. Next slide, Jill. The tagline for Cox recently was established to be Ally for Life. And we realized that what Ally for Life means is that we're here for the good times, but we're also here for the challenging times. This is going to be a three-part series, and you're now in series one. We saw a need that we had to first go through the process of stabilizing ourselves. The next series will be about stabilizing the team, and then how we go about looking forward. I'd like to introduce Arjun Singh, who is a faculty member and does work with complex problem-solving projects all over the world with Cox. He doesn't come from an academic background, although he is an academic. He has a global consulting practice and has managed businesses in times of great stress for the last 20 years. And Arjun, we're thrilled to have you. Maribeth is also a professor here in the leadership, and she teaches leadership, but she also brings a background of execution. She has a military background and a business background in which she has had to execute incredibly important decisions under great deals of stress. And the same is true for Karin, who is also a member of the faculty and it teaches leadership. Next, please. There's three parts of this agenda. The first is work-life balance, which Arjun will go into and give you lots of tools. The next part is managing your mental health, and Maribeth will address that. And then Karin, thankfully, will focus us on what happens next and to understand that this is a growth opportunity here and we can make the most of it. I'd like to now turn this over to Arjun, and thank you so much, Arjun.
Great, thank you, David, and good afternoon, everyone. I love to start my presentations off with a little bit of humor, and I think this one really speaks to the situation that all of us are in right now. So who led the transformation, the digital transformation of your company? Was it your CEO, CTO, or was it the virus? And I mean, this is unfortunately the reality for everyone here today, having to work from home, not going into a work environment. So it is a significant change that everyone's going through. And I'm going to share with you some of the lessons that I've learned myself personally, having worked from home for about 15 years or so. The first week is great. You get up and you're like, wow, I don't have to commute. I do not have to get ready and go into a workplace. And so everything kind of rebalances itself. And then as you start getting into week 2, 3, 4 onwards, there's certain principles I found that work really, really well. Having a schedule. I mean, it's really easy to not have one. Start waking up later in the morning, and other things. It's really important to really have a schedule. To provide some sort of a structure to your work as well as your personal life. Waking up, getting ready, actually preparing. So it's really around the ritual for getting ready. So that mentally and physically you're preparing yourself to be the most productive that you can be given the situation that you're in. The second part's really around structuring your day, and so the structure now is going to be very different from what you had before. It's no longer a 9 to 5. There's other activities that you have to have, family considerations as well, and so it's really around so what would be the most productive for you, and how can you structure it around the other commitments that you have, and recognizing that a 9 to 5 may actually be a 4 a.m. to 2 a.m. Sort of a schedule. That being said, it's really important to have a clear ending to the workday. I still remember years ago when I started working, you're in front of your computer, it's yourself, and just doing work. It is just so easy to just keep going. And it's interesting, like from our students as well, we've had the same feedback. You just keep working. And so years ago, I instituted a rule that at 5 o'clock, I switch off my computer. So there's no more email after that. There's no more checking emails on phones or actually working on anything. 5 o'clock, end the day for the time being. Spend time with the family. And then there are certain instances in which, dealing with Asia may have to kind of come back online a little bit later on, but there is a distinct end and time that you're giving yourself. Weekly reflections, really important, as you're starting to adjust to this new normal that we have, look at what works for you. A lot of the principles that I'll share with you, they actually may work for you, but you have to figure out which ones are the most important for you, and then look at how you can recalibrate that into your work week, getting into the next week. Have scheduled breaks, and so this goes back to like your structure and your schedule as well. It is just so easy to just be in front of your computer, be on the phone, and just keep going, and it's not sustainable. You have to really think through what times do you want to take breaks at. Have them scheduled in your calendar. I think that's a really good best practice to think through, so that you can recharge, you can relax, you can reflect on the work that you're doing. And then finally on the slide, a to-do list. This is an interesting one. There's 1,000 things that you're thinking of doing. If you keep them in your mind, it's really taking a lot from your mind share. It's also things that you really shouldn't be having to think through too much. If you put them in a to-do list, whether it's a piece of paper, whether it's software, whether it's, you know, the simple to-dos that you have on your phone these days, it'll really help you become a little bit more strategic and help you think through priorities, scheduling, management of what you have to, yeah, have to do. The next part's around family boundaries and productive time. You know, great news is you're at home now. The downside to that is you're physically there, and it ends up having a lot of different distractions. And so part of thriving in this environment is really understanding, you know, what are your biggest productive times that you have. As I mentioned, you know, it's no longer a 9 to 5 right now, and so it's really around understanding, you know, when can you actually get a lot of work done. And I physically used to live on the East Coast. I moved to the West Coast, but still working with you know, a lot of companies on the East Coast. One of the revelations that I had a few years ago was, hey, you know what, the 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock Pacific time doesn't really work because my clients are actually up earlier. And so I adjusted the work schedule based on that. And so it's very easy to typically be on conference calls at 5, 6 in the morning, to actually go through productive working times before the family wakes up, and you know, starting at 5 o'clock, say till about 8, have breakfast that's scheduled in with everybody, and then getting back to work. And then similarly, if you're dealing with Asia, that's the flip side. You know, they wake up in the afternoon, evening our time, and so it's really easy to have productive times with them starting 6, 7 in the evening till later on. And so, you know, so if you parse the day that way, you can end up understanding like what's really productive for you. Distractions, this is a huge one. You know, it's because you're physically here, it's so easy for family to walk in, and ask you to change batteries, or to do other activities. But there is a significant effect that distractions have to your work, and typically it takes 20 plus minutes to actually get back to what you're doing. And if you can think through, like, you know, how many distractions do you have in a day? Do you get interrupted 4, 5, 6 times? You're already losing a couple of hours of productive work that you can do. And so part of this is a huge learning experience. And so it's really important to be flexible, you know, iterate on productivity, try different things, you know, try and get up earlier and see if you can get stuff done then, maybe work till later on. The other part around managing kids and pets, kids are very happy to see you, pets as well. But it's really important to establish certain boundaries around them. You know, have some sort of a system that you can communicate with them when you're on a conference call. So for example, my kids hopefully will not walk into this room because there's a sign outside that has a red light there, which indicates to them I'm on a conference call. Please don't disturb me. The first thing they usually ask me, they open the door a little bit. First thing is they look at my computer, they look at my phone, say, and ask, "Are you talking to anyone?" And if the answer is no, then it's a prelude for them to ask other questions as well. So having those boundaries is really important. The other part to this is around scheduling and family time. You know, so the family thinks you're here, you're available. They may be distracting you. If you set up certain boundaries in terms of, hey, we're gonna have breakfast from 8 to 8:30. We're gonna have lunch from 12 to 12:45. We're gonna have exercise at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then we can do other things afterwards. So the expectations are set in terms of you know, when you will be interacting with them, and when they can expect to actually be around you. You know, so that way you start having demarcation between your work and the life part of what you have to challenge. And then the third part to this is really around exercise and nourishment. So this is really, you know, like, really do take time for yourself. It's really important, much more than you would have in a normal working environment. You know, the first one's around, you know, take time for meals. I remember when I started working from home years ago, there were multiple times where, at 4 or 5 in the afternoon, I would wonder, like, why am I so hungry? And then the answer was, well, it was because I skipped lunch, I skipped breakfast, I literally did not eat anything. I just was so engrossed in work that I didn't really take time for nourishment. And so, it's important. You can schedule it in, put it into your calendar, even if it's 10, 15, 30 minutes. It's very important because your body does need that physical nourishment that you have. The second part to this is, really plan your meals. Try and do it on a weekly basis. We are in challenging situations right now where we may not be able to get all the ingredients. We've turned it into a game in our household. We don't get fresh produce right now. There's certain things that we have in the pantry. And so every day it's a game around like, hey, so what's the fanciest meal that we can concoct based on the ingredients that we have? And then if you plan it out on a longer term basis, so for example, weekly, that can help you in planning planning and thinking through, what other things you may have to acquire. One of the biggest downsides of the situation that we're in right now is around being social. So there's the introverts that are very happy with the situation. You get time, you can do a lot of thinking. And then there's the extroverts that are extremely frustrated in terms of not having interactions. And so we've seen all the news around Zoom and Zooming and happy hours. I would say maybe consider taking it to a different level. Think through, can you do social meals? So maybe if you schedule in time with your coworkers, your fellow students, and have a social meal. So that could be opportunities for informal interactions that you had physically. And the other part to this is around exercise. It's really important to get some exercise in. Put that in your schedule so that you're held accountable for it. And so this could be either social. There's a lot of classes online they're offering that you can do. It could be with the family as well. It could be and so you can turn that into a very social exercise as well. And there's a lot of remote classes that if you go online, you can go through, and just have a regular schedule so that you're getting the physical nourishment that you really require to be able to thrive in this.
So Arjun, we've gotten a few different questions that are really good. In fact, I could say that some of these questions are just the quintessential ones. And other panelists may note these questions because your answer may add richness to the discussion. But the first one is, what does productive or successful work mean in this new environment? Should we adjust our goals? It's not feasible to ask people to work at all hours, especially nights, and we don't want our employees to burn out.
That is such a great question, and I'm glad that's the first one. And productivity is really relevant, right? In terms of what you can and cannot do. The amount of output that you would be able to produce in a work environment, physically being in an office versus being at home is a little bit different. One of the things I learned was I do a lot of analysis and work for companies, and just going through a lot of data points and putting things together. And what I learned was, when I end up in a very unproductive time and I'm trying to do that kind of work, putting a deck together could potentially take me 2-3 hours. The flip side to that is, if I end up in the right mind frame and I'm thinking through and the work in the right way, that work that would take me a couple of hours, I can actually get it done in about 20-30 minutes. But it is really around a lot of the conditioning that I talked to you around, right? In terms of understanding, like, what is that productive time for me? So for me personally, it's 6 o'clock in the morning because everyone's asleep. No one's really disturbing you. First question my wife asked me this morning was, hey, so what time did you sleep last night? And the answer was, I slept at 3 a.m. because I was working on a report, which for me, I spent a lot less time on after everyone was asleep. And so I worked from 11 until 3 o'clock, and I achieved far more significant results than I would have if I had tried it yesterday in the afternoon, right? So that's part of the whole recognition in terms of how can you adjust what you're doing to get and get to or close to your peak productivity.
And we have another question, and this is another quintessential question. How can we get coworkers or bosses to empathize with the unique situation we're all in? By being by yourself versus working at home with spouses and children or all their distractions is really making this a different task than it would have been otherwise.
So that's actually another great question, and so it comes back to this whole notion of you're at home, you're working. There's certain people that will adapt to this much quicker and much faster than others, right? And others may struggle with that. And part of this is around really communication, explaining to people in terms of how well this is working for you, what the challenges are. I really recommend having regular touch points. So beyond the Zoom happy hours, try and do coffee with them. Maybe do the social meals where you're not only sharing the outputs of what you're doing, but also the process in which you're coming up with what you're doing and the challenges that you're facing. So the key is around more communication with your coworkers and making sure that the communication is not only around outputs, but that you're connecting with them on a different level and explaining the process and challenges and learnings as well, so that they get a better understanding of what you're going through.
And the next question is related to it. It's about teams. And I did want to point out that this series is about stabilizing yourself. And of course, you need to do that in the context of what people expect you in your teams. The next series is actually going to be an hour about how to stabilize your team and maximize your team during this time. But here's a really wonderful question. What are some things that can be done to maintain and improve team cohesiveness during this time? And this will be the last question for Arjun, and then we'll shift to Maribeth.
So team cohesiveness is, I think, very important. This is all goes back to productivity and how you can work better together. I think we're at an inflection point where we've had a significant world event that has forced the majority of us to be working virtually in a very different environment. There has been a trend already so far in the last decade, if you think through what's happened in terms of having virtual companies, virtual working, virtual sort of environments, but this is really going to be a catalyst. And so a lot of what we're going through right now is going to end up being the new normal in the future. So part of this is around thinking through, okay, so for teams, how do we replicate the informal nature of interactions that we have, right? So-called cooler talks, for example, right? And there are a lot of different technologies like Slack and others where they're trying to replicate that. I think the biggest key to cohesiveness is around communication, as I'd mentioned previously. Making sure your coworkers understand what you're going through. If you have certain commitments that you have or challenges during the daytime, making it clear. Like the people I work with regularly, they know. Do not schedule a call with Arjun between 8:30 and 9 o'clock in the morning, because that's the time I'm having breakfast with my family. Do not schedule a call at 5:30 in the evening, because that's dinner time with my family. So having a clear communication, understanding of what those boundaries are, helps the teams to also kind of work through like what they can and cannot do with you.
So there's one more question, and then that will be the last one. And it is, are there any recommendations on how to hold yourself accountable to stay on task, accountable to take breaks, to eat meals, and to make family time? And this truly is the next question, and then we'll shift to Maribeth.
So accountability is a really interesting concept in these days right now. As you've transitioned from being in an office, being in a school environment into a virtual environment, I talked about the whole notion of having very clear boundaries in terms of timing, scheduling, family, other sort of distractions that you have. So the metrics really change, because when you're in the environment that we're in right now, I think you can't really compare between this and being in an office or school environment. And so from an accountability perspective, one of the things that I found personally to be very helpful is the weekly reflections. So at the end of the week, Friday afternoons, I generally don't schedule any meetings or interactions. And I go through, the work that was produced, what was the aim for the week, where were some of the gaps, and really doing a gap analysis, and then really thinking through like, okay, why? So is it because the workload was more than the capacity? Is it because there were significantly more distractions than what was anticipating, or are there other reasons for not having that? And having that kind of a mental exercise is really helpful to then think through like, okay, so what would be realistic for moving forward for the next week, the next month, the next few months or so.
Thank you, Arjun. And Maribeth, you are.
All right, hi everyone. We also wanted to touch on mental health really quick during this presentation. There's often a taboo or something that people really just don't want to talk about as mental health. But we felt it was important to remind folks that this is normal to feel stressed out and possibly even a little depressed in times such as these. There's what we call situational depression. And this is a short-term depression that tends to occur when there are traumatic events or big changes in someone's life, such as the COVID-19. It also tends to be worse when people are more isolated, which again is part of the COVID-ID. We know it's going to be an issue for a lot of you, and so we just kind of want to touch base with that a little bit. The bad news is that the symptoms are similar to clinical depression, but the good news is that it tends to get better once people come to terms with their new situation. This doesn't mean that the situation has to be fixed or necessarily go away. It's just we have to wait for things to get back to normal. It just means is once you can get your arms around what is happening, you're able to function better and you're able to kind of get back to more of what you would call like your normal self, whatever that is for you. So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about some of the things that you can do to try and stay mentally healthy and in these times, and then a few tips if you're already feeling a little bit overwhelmed or struggling some. So many of these tips will overlap some with what Arjun's already talked about, so I'll hit some of those quickly, but then we'll talk about some of the other ones too. First, the biggest thing and probably the most important is to manage your expectations. Voltaire once said that the perfect is the enemy of the good. A lot of you are overachievers and are used to not failing, but sometimes things are just out of our control. In times like this, you have to be realistic in your expectations. So I was in a bad car accident before, and I will always have chronic pain. And initially I struggled to get my arms around that idea that things are going to be different, that I couldn't do everything anymore, or that I wouldn't be as good at doing certain types of things. And I was stuck for a long time. And when I finally realized that I could still do things, but they would just look different, and that why I couldn't do everything that I used to do, I could still do a lot of different things. And so finally you have to give yourself permission that you're not going to be perfect. A lot of us have these tapes in our heads that play that we aren't doing well, or it says we can't do something, or that we're going to fail. And sometimes they're from your parents or for somebody else, and you need to get those out of your head and stop them from running in there. Second, as we mentioned before, it's all about routine. Because of the isolation, we can't do the things that we're used to doing and have the same type of a structure. So that structure is going to be really important. So create that new routine and structure and stick to it. Third, be proactive. First, know your red flags and try and catch them early so that you don't spiral. So for instance, you get headaches, you get upset stomachs, you get edgy, you get frustrated. When you start feeling those symptoms come on, identify them early and take a time out and do something to get you back on track. Make sure that you're staying connected and reaching out to others. One of the ways that we can provide some control in our own lives is by helping others, and it makes us also feel more valuable again. That said, I do caution your social media connections. Be careful that you're not getting sucked into all of the negativity of the social media and other people and you spiral down with it. So some of you may need to limit some of that also, or only check it certain types of days. Fourth, do something every day that brings you joy, even if it's just for 10 minutes. It might be laughing with your kids, reading a book, singing, whatever that is for you. Make sure you take that time every day to do it. Even though we don't think we have that time that you spend in there is going to make you more rejuvenated and be able to come back and do what you need to do. For those of you who get cabin fever, try something new. Arjun mentioned, trying to come up with a new recipe. Maybe it's walking in a different direction. Whatever that is, try and do something new every day to kind of get you out of that rut. Fifth, make sure you're getting fresh air and sunshine. Research has shown that this is tied to our mental health, and it's easy to get stuck in a corner every day, or maybe you're having to work in a room where there's not a window. So making sure that you're getting out and getting that fresh air and sunshine. And then finally, I don't mean to preach, but I do think it's worth mentioning is that you need to be careful of your caffeine, your nicotine, and your alcohol intakes. These are all substances that alter our minds. And so if you're, for instance, if you're used to drinking 2 cups of coffee every day and now you're drinking 12, it's going to impact your mental health. So just being careful of those types of things. All right, next slide. For those of you that are already kind of feeling overwhelmed, there's a bunch of things that you can try and do. So we've given you a bunch of them. It doesn't mean that you should do all of these, but try and figure out what works for you, because some things will work for one person and not somebody else. So first, the biggest thing for me is to practice gratitude. The biggest growth that I had that helped me when in all of my my traumatic experiences is when I realized that there can be chaos all around me, but I can still be very grateful for what's going on in my life. My worst day on this planet is still better than most people's best day. And so that doesn't mean that everything is going well and I'm happy and ecstatic, but you still have a lot of things that you can be grateful for. So try and think of daily things that you're grateful for. Second, practice mindfulness. There was an HBR article that came out last week that can give you some tips on this, or there's lots of websites that can help you that. Just, monitoring your breathing and taking that 15 minutes out to kind of help you reground and kind of get out of your head. Think about physical activity. So for a lot of us, that releases those endorphins. It may be even just if you can't get outside, running in place, doing exercises, something like that that's going to give you that physical activity that you need. The other thing is try and stay in the present. So we tend to be future focused, or we get stuck in the past and worrying about what we can't control. So try and stay in the present and focus on the things that you have control of. Thinking about finding someone to vent to. So sometimes I'm not talking about whining and getting stuck, but sometimes if you're frustrated with your kids and just the chaos that's going on, find someone you can vent to so that you can go back into that. For those people that are really hard on themselves, pretend you're your best friend and think about what would you say to yourself. Typically, if someone was in our own situation, we would be telling them something totally different than what we're telling ourselves. So think about kind of what you would say to somebody else. And then lastly, if you're really struggling, seek help. A lot of companies have EAPs, they have, there's counseling services, there's other people that can help you. Reach out to somebody and make sure you're getting the help that you need. And I do believe we have some resources at the end of this presentation that we'll put up that actually are some numbers and things that you can call. Are there any questions? And while Dave is looking, again, remember some of these things. Don't try and do 12 new things, because that will make you feel more overwhelmed than what you are right now. And then the last thing I would also, I didn't mention but probably should have is remember everybody else is struggling right now. And so try and practice grace. If you're having a bad day and you're frustrated, you want someone to kind of give you that grace. So remember that also when people are getting short with you and things like that, kind of try and take 5 steps back. Remember that everyone's stressed right now, and try and not take it head on and give people grace also.
So, Maribeth, someone asked about the HBR article, and I just wanted to let them know that article will be in the resources that we send you.
Absolutely, and there's some good references of online things that you can look at. But HBR had a week, and they put out several of those, and they're all excellent for people to look at, and it kind of gets you started.
One of the things that people are asking is, and this may help them feel some sense of control, do they have an office location in their house, or how do you negotiate with the other members of your family to have a space that's just for you?
Well, I think if you have enough space that everyone can have their own space, that's great. But a lot of us we have multiple people in our houses and we don't have that space. And one thing that you can consider doing is doing a schedule, so that you can also even share that space if you only have one office. Maybe you do your calls in the morning and that person does them in the afternoon, or you do them by a couple of hours, or you hang a sheet up where you can actually have a door, create something in the walls that you can actually have a door or space that's just yours. One of the things that my husband and I do is we share our schedules every day. So I know that what his peak times are, and so I try and stay off the internet during those times, so that if he's on a video call, I'm not draining those resources if I don't have to be. And so for me, it's a lot of it is talking about it to people and making sure that you're communicating what your needs are, not assuming that everyone knows what you need. And also remember, you can go outside. There's some nice spaces like early in the morning or whatever like that. Getting that sunshine and being outside in the fresh air at the same time can also help. But the biggest thing is you're going to have to communicate with people and tell them what you need and why you need it. If there's no more questions, and I guess we'll turn it over to Karin.
We've had some great tips on mental health and on staying connected and adjusting to working from home in a crisis. And we're all in different situations. Some of us are working less, some of us are working a lot more, but we've all experienced a change. And it may be helpful to kind of reframe this thought of change being an opportunity and going from we're just surviving it to maybe trying to thrive in it. And so I love this quote. This is a Ben Franklin quote about opportunity, that even out of adversity can come great opportunity if we have the courage to pursue it. And so sometimes it's helpful to kind of try to reframe the stress that we're under as an opportunity. So if we can look at the next slide, we can think about reframing this as a growth opportunity. And if you know the work of Carol Dweck at all, she talks about thinking about the power of yet. I may not be great at Zoom yet, but I will get good at it. And so always trying to think about so many skills are possible to improve upon. It doesn't have to be something complex. It could be that you're trying to get better at data visualization. So you want to learn Tableau, or it could be that you just want to become more empathetic. And so you're going to work on trying to work on your empathy. So whatever it is, you can try to kind of reframe this situation that we're in as an opportunity for growth. And I always find it interesting. I think back on this book by Shonda Rhimes. So she talked about the year of yes. She is, in case you don't know who Shonda Rhimes is, she's the writer and producer for Grey's Anatomy, Scandal. She did How to Get Away with Murder. And she's a really big introvert. She found that she always tried to avoid public speaking. She hired a publicist just to avoid having to talk to anybody. She loved just writing and sitting alone writing. And one day she was kind of bragging to her sister as she became and parties, got a chance to meet a king and queen. And her sister said, well, how many of those have you said yes to? And she said, well, none. Like, I don't want to do those. And her sister said, you never say yes to anything. And it struck her as an opportunity to try to push herself out of her comfort zone. So she started the year of yes, where she said she would say yes to any opportunity that came along. So it's kind of fun. She ended up, she's a Dartmouth grad, remember, huge introvert writer. She agreed to do the commencement speech. That was one of the first things that came across. And she said yes to that. But they weren't all public speaking related. She also made some changes to her physical health. And also, in fact, this just reminded me from the question earlier, she changed her signature line to say, to sort of prioritize family time. We may not be able to do this right now, but she said, I do not answer work emails after 7 p.m. If you work for me, put down your phone, you shouldn't either. So she kind of set a priority of like, I'm gonna have family time after 7 p.m. So she said yes in a lot of different ways in her life. So I started thinking, we could think about this as the quarantine of yes. This is our chance to think about what can we do when we emerge from our cocoon, however long our quarantine might be, what skills are we gonna have gained at the end? You know, we're a caterpillar now, what kind of butterfly will we be at the end? So it could be you try to take on a new skill if you have time. Some people are learning guitar or a new language, but you could think more work related. So thinking about getting a new certification, like if you're a project manager, get your PMP. I mentioned like getting data visualization software like Tableau or something. So it could be something more work related. It could also be something personal that's still work related, like trying to get better at empathy or at caring and compassion, or at giving good feedback to people. Like you can pick something small that you can work on that's still really important. So remember, it's the power of yet. I may not be good at this yet, but I can work on that. And so I think during this time is kind of interesting in that everybody's world has been turned upside down. So how can I, you know, some of us have more time, some of us have less time, but sometimes the expectations might have shifted. Maybe they're a little bit lower. So we have a chance to take a risk, put ourselves a little bit out of a comfort zone into something new. And I think if you look at this picture to the right with the letters, you can start thinking like, what can I do that would be in that green box, the decide box? This is things that are really important, but that are not urgent. So oftentimes we focus so much on that blue box, the do, the urgent, right now, because our to-do lists are so big and there's so many fires we're putting out. But depending on your business, you may not have as much time to interface with customers or the ability to interface with customers. Maybe the pace has changed for the way that you work. And so it's time to think about what are these important things that I've been putting off that I never really had time to schedule that I could tackle. So it can be work or personal related. So think about that green box, that decide box, more strategic thinking. And I think there's a fun story that kind of highlights both of these together. I have a friend who's head of a division in a corporation, and about a month ago, the CEO said, okay, so you can tell something's gonna happen with coronavirus. Please get out your continuity of operations plan. So she was fairly new. She was like, oh, okay, I'll find out who in my division has that plan. But she got a copy from another division, really thorough, really interesting ideas for how to maintain continuity of operations during a difficult time. She finally found out who in her division had hers. She gets it, 20 pages, super excited, beautiful cover sheet, opens it up, blank. It was a template. It hadn't been done at all because it always sat in that green box of someday we'll schedule, someday this will be important, but it was never urgent. And all of a sudden it became very urgent. But the person who was in charge of that is now one of those people who's working twice as much, doesn't have any extra time. So somebody else in the organization who is one of these people who has more time, whose job, frankly, is they're just not able to do from afar very well, stepped up and said, I'll do it. It's something new. It's out of her comfort zone. It's, at this point, are there lower expectations? Absolutely, because she is doing something that's helping out the organization. No one's expecting her to be perfect at this. So it's a great chance for her to do that and to show her worth to the organization. She has the time, she was willing to do it. And now she's kind of being looked at as like, wow, this is great. Look at her. She really rose to the challenge during this difficult time. So it's a good time for all of us personally and professionally to think about what's in that green box, what has been put on the back burner. It's busy, just keeps forward, we're working on. So I think what I like about that is it's kind of reframing a challenge as an opportunity. And so next time I will suggest some specific tools for helping with the team and thinking about how we make ourselves more cohesive, et cetera. But try to think about having the quarantine of yes. When you emerge from our chrysalis and we are become butterflies, what will we be able to do? What skills will we have developed during this difficult time? So I'm trying to end on a little bit of a positive note, but I'm happy to open it up to any questions that you have.
Thank you, Karin, and good afternoon, everybody. Just given the face of changes in a virtual world and some of the adversity that we're all experiencing, even our team today is experiencing a little bit of that. If you had heard, David's microphone had started to cut in and out a little bit just a few minutes ago. And so we're going to transition Q&A, and I'll field a couple of questions right now. There was a question that came in actually specifically for Maribeth, and then if you guys have questions about Karin, please don't hesitate to put those in the Q&A box. Maribeth, one question came in: how can you tactfully guide a coworker who has shown some of those unusual or abnormal behaviors that you had previously addressed?
That's a tough one. And so I'm gonna put a couple caveats on that because I don't know the relationship that you have with that coworker. If it's a really good one, then I think you can have a fairly frank discussion and just say, hey, you know, look, there's a lot of changes going on right now, and you know, there's a lot of moving parts, and I'm kind of concerned and about, you know, how everything's going on like that. I've been struggling also. So maybe we need to find some help for you, something like you can be that direct. Another thing that could be be more indirect is, and this might be something that a lot of you could do, is say, hey, you know, I went to this webinar this afternoon, and they were talking about that one of the things, and I do believe this, is that we should be checking in on our teammates, and not just our managers and us looking down, but our peers. I've done that with a lot of my people, and just saying that, hey, they suggest we reach out to people and kind of check on them, and that they had some great tips in there about, you know, trying to you know, kind of get our world structured and organized, and the idea that sometimes we may need some help of putting things in order. And so there's a way that you could actually send them this program or say, hey, this is why I'm reaching out. and kind of normalizing that there's a lot of people struggling right now, and they encourage us to reach out to people to check on them and then to give them the resources that they need. So you can also do it that way. If there's someone, if you have an EAP in your organization, or someone that does those types, or in HR, you can also sometimes contact that person and have them reach out to them, because they may have some more skills to ask them the right questions and to get at those types of things. Because sometimes it's going to depend on the severity of the issues. If someone you think is clinically depressed, so they're suicidal, or that they can't get out of bed, that they're really severe, then you definitely need to get somebody, a professional, involved and help and get some answers for that also. So hopefully I've answered that question, but it kind of depends on the severity level and the relationship that you have. But an easy way out would be just to talk about the presentation that you just went to and email it to everybody and say, hey, I'm just checking in with people. And that's a way to kind of easily kind of work into that discussion. And just trying to normalize it and not using words like there's something that's wrong with them or things like that. It's just like, hey, we're all struggling to get our arms around what's going on. And so I'm finding it's helpful to talk about it. And kind of, like I said, making it so that there's no shame in that, or there's not a problem that's wrong with them.
Great, thank you. We also had a question come in for Arjun specifically. Arjun, how do you see the strategic consulting model sustain in this virtual world? In the absence of things like customer travel and face-to-face meetings, how do you envision the model will evolve?
So that's a great question, and it's going to be an evolution. So if you rewind like 10, maybe 20 years back, with strategic consultancy, there's a huge notion that if you're not at a client site, you're not interacting with a client. There's this whole perception that you're not actually doing any work. So that has significantly evolved in the last couple of decades. With web technologies, Zoom, which we're using right now, and others as well. But there is something to be said in terms of productive times with FaceTime with a client. And so clients are having to evolve as well in terms of having virtual meetings versus face-to-face. A lot of workshops, actual physical meetings are going online as well. And so this evolution is going to continue. And I think this whole sort of catalyst event that's happened for us going virtual with the whole virus is going to lead to profound changes in how everyone works. So a lot more comfort in terms of using online technologies, using that, much more acceptance that a company can actually work virtually and be as productive, if not more, than before. And so the perceptions are going to start changing. What I would expect is that a lot of like the larger organizations generally take longer to adapt to this. And so, for them, it's going to be a slow evolution in understanding, but the smaller and mid-sized companies are going to adapt to that, right? So there's going to be proxies for like that FaceTime that you're talking about in terms of having virtual interactions, maybe even changing the nature of some of the outputs so that it speaks to this world. But it is a significant catalyst event that we're dealing with, and it will evolve.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, with that, I'd like to go ahead and just thank everybody again for attending today. We really enjoyed this time with you. And as a reminder, this is just the first of a multi-part session. The second session will address how you stabilize teams. So taking the individual approach from today and then evolving that into a team approach for our next session. And please keep an eye out. We'll communicate information about that second session in the coming days. If you do have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to send those directly to David Jacobson. And his email address is djacobson@smu.edu. Once again, David Jacobson at djacobson@smu.edu. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon.